you were trained by a saint, Saint Josémaria. I wonder if you might be able to shed any light on what would a saint say, maybe like Saint Josémaria, about this great struggle that we're witnessing right now.
Well, in a way, he was prophetic. I mean, he could see all of this coming.
All right, everyone, welcome back to the Pinedo Brothers Podcast. I'm JP, your host, and today we have, by popular request, the return of our very special guest, Father Paul Donlan. Father Paul, thank you so much again for sitting down with me.
You're welcome, James.
This is part two. We're going to be picking up where Father Paul left off last. He was just ordained as a young priest at the express calling of Saint Josémaria Escrivá, the founder of Opus Dei. If you would like to hear that first part one, I'm going to link to it in the description below, so feel free to check it out. But before we dive in, I wonder, in the events of this week that's happened with the news about the Supreme Court and the leak of the opinion of the Supreme Court, could you shed a little bit of light on what the country thought about abortion when you're a young priest just starting out, and compare that a little bit to now?
Oh, absolutely. No question about it. I would say the vast majority of Americans considered it a terrible thing. Of course, it was a criminal. It was criminalized, obviously. So the Supreme Court decision on January 22nd, 1973, Roe versus Wade, was a decriminalization on a national level of what was a crime. Up to that point, there were two states that had legalized it, New York State and California, if I'm not mistaken, but that was very, very short time, relatively short time before Roe versus Wade. But growing up in the 1940s and 1950s, and then ordained in the 1960s, it was considered, obviously, very, very, very bad. Everyone had empathy for any woman that did it, but it was by no means was there a consensus in favor of it.
It must have been quite a shock then in 1973. You've probably been a priest now for a few years. And
yes, I've been a priest exactly for 11 years. It was a terrible shock, a big shock. It was it completely caught me by surprise. I was unaware of what had been going on. And maybe I was not up to snuff in the news, but it really caught me off guard.
Well, I know it caught a lot of Catholics off guard, just like the leak of the Supreme Court opinion, I think, is catching a lot of, I'm not sure exactly how to classify them, but people that are for abortion is catching them off guard, this leak. And I know that I've been praying quite a bit that the 5 justices that form the majority opinion that we now know will stand firm. I'm sure I encourage everyone to pray as well.
Well, the leak is I think it's a political ruse.
Yes.
To throw the court off balance, because it should not have been done, obviously, until they actually officially vote and publicly declare the vote, I guess. So the fact that it leaked, but whoever did it, did something very bad.
Yeah.
Because this is putting pressure on those apparently five justices to be sensitive to a kind of noise of opposition. And there will be a furor of noise. But it is just a lot of noise. It doesn't really, even now, does not represent, my opinion, what I've been able to ascertain. No way does it represent the majority of American people. I think people really are against it. Plus, as they see more and more the progression that is occurring, we've moved way beyond abortion in the first months, like first trimester, or what it is, to all the way to post-abortion killing, which is in fact infanticide. And now they're proposing in different places infanticide up to 10 years after birth. I mean,
10 years. I'd heard about 28 days, but 10 years, really.
Oh, no, they're promoting this more and more. See, they're pushing the envelope. It always is that way. You see, once you unravel a fundamental absolute truth, there's no end to the stretching of it.
Hmm.
This happens in all areas of moral principles, moral teaching. So it is predictable. The logic. So the logic continues. Why not kill a baby that you hadn't foreseen has some defect or some reason not to be wanted? Or it occurs later on as something that was genetic but didn't surface until the child was 5 years old or 10 years old. So it's always going to be pushing the envelope. I think the American people are beginning to be more and more horrified by the practices and the legislations and the proposals that are circulating, eminently in states like California, where I'm living now.
Right.
And so there's the beginning of a pullback. And so how far do you pull back? Well, really, it's a question of going back to whether or not this was a good a good decision
Right.
by the court. And from every point of view, I'm not a jurist, but I know enough about the English common law tradition, the precedents tradition that we use in the American constitutional law, et cetera, that this is clearly a bad decision from any point of view.
Yeah.
It was a very bad decision.
Right.
It has to be overturned. Of course, being overturned, what it means is it goes back to the states.
Right.
So it isn't prohibited nationwide. It's
Right.
prohibited as a federal national right. But it
Right.
just throws it back to where it was before Roe versus Wade, to the state. So that already is a good thing, because I think, but that means another uphill battle state by state by state.
Right. Exactly. It returns this decision to the democratic process instead of to the 9 jurors that make up the Supreme Court.
Correct.
And so that means that the battle, we just now are able to use our voice again on this,
Yeah.
and hopefully we use our voice well.
Yeah. The biggest lie in all of this is that the phrase "woman's reproductive rights." I mean, it is, first of all, it's not reproductive at all. It's contrary to reproduction.
It's anti-reproduction.
Yeah, it's anti-reproduction. Yeah. And then the people who are pro-life are called anti-abortion. See, they stole the terminology. They've chained the terminology. So you are pro-life. No, you are anti-abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, you're anti-woman, because this is a woman's right of reproductive health. So it's all, of course, fog language.
Right.
It's smokescreen language.
Right, exactly. It's the only way you can justify a barbaric practice like abortion is by speaking figuratively in a way that shrouds the truth.
Exactly, and making everything become abstract.
Right.
So terminating a pregnancy as opposed to killing the unborn. So
Right.
they don't like to use that phrase, kill the unborn. So it jars the ear, does it
Right.
not? So terminate the pregnancy.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring this back together to what we started at the beginning. And right now, we're caught up in a great struggle in this country. At least from my perspective, that's what I perceive. You were trained by a saint, Saint Josémaria. I wonder if you might be able to shed any light on what would a saint say, maybe like Saint Josémaria, about this great struggle that we're witnessing right now.
Well, in a way, he was prophetic. I mean, he could see all of this coming. He saw all this coming back in the 1930s and 1940s. And he used a language which was very, very simple, very graphic, to form the young people around him back in the 1930s and 1940s, 1950s, and thereafter, until he died in 1975, which was the first thing he saw. He used to use the image of waves sweeping over the Western world primarily, because he was European after all. So he was thinking in terms of the European continent, but it's worldwide. But his first wave was the red wave of Marxism. Call it what you want: Marxism, communism, sometimes called socialism. It hides under different disguises or languages. The woke left, whatever. But ultimately, what horrified him about this threat was the combination of not only atheism, but the anti-theism. In other words, the idea that you must not only disbelieve in God, you must eradicate the very notion of God from the minds of the people, particularly the young. And that's so behind all of this leftist movement, ultimately, there was not only a disbelief in God, a denial of God, but it's a truly an anti-God movement. So
a sort of fanatic religion of its own, it seems like.
It is. It's that because it requires a belief. You can't prove that God does not exist. You can prove that he does exist. Now, the proof of the existence of God may not convince, may not persuade, because there are many factors involved in the ascent of the intellect that involve emotions and experiences and other things that are understandable. But you cannot prove that God doesn't exist. So you have to really, in a way, use the force of will to deny that God exists. But it's more than that. It's a campaign to eradicate God from memory, from terminology, from life, from education, from family, across the board, and to relegate those people whom they consider fanatics, who still believe in God, to a presence without voice, to be cornered into a sanctuary of a church or a synagogue or a mosque at most. So that's clearly, this is what he saw, that he considered that the first big wave, the red wave, that tied in with the wave that he considered, that he called a gray wave, which is, again, the secularism, which, again, will not give the voice of God or the voice of the people of God any hearing, that they cannot have any effect in the public forum. They're not to be heard in the courts, in academia, in legislation. They're non-citizens in a way. They have no rights, so they can only be heard within the sanctuary of their private churches, synagogues, mosques, what have you, temples.
It's that classic. It's like that classic phrase. I'm personally opposed to abortion, but
that's right. That's one of the ways in which it can be stated in American language. And the third wave, which I think he gave it the color black, was the wave. Well, nowadays we would simply call it pornography. It is at his day, pornography as such, it didn't exist anywhere except as underground literature. Literally, it was, again, like abortion, it was criminalized. You could not have a legitimate pornography in most places, certainly not in the United States of America, or in his country, Spain or Italy. These things had to be done underground and circulated against the law. Not only pornography in terms of printed material and now the media expression of it, but all that goes with it. So he used the word concupiscence, sensuality, a massive movement towards this, catering to the most base pleasures that human beings experience as temptation. Ultimately, human sexuality taken out of the context of the beauty of matrimony. The beauty of matrimony between one man and one woman, open to life, oriented to his family. I mean, this is how God created us. Of course, there's no easy challenge, as we know. To live in harmony, husband and wife, it's no easy challenge to have children, and to raise them is always a battle. So raise them well. But it is what the church supports, and not only church, but the Catholic Church, but Christian churches traditionally. We all did. And what Jews, especially the Orthodox Jews, have always supported. Mormons to this day support that, I think. And so this is, and many people who may necessarily adhere to a body religion, officially a church, what have you, they adhere to that personally. They follow that ethos. So he considered this as a real danger. You can see it coming over the Western world that would devour youth with this, because it appeals especially to the sexual drive of young people, which is extremely vibrant at a young age, teenagers and adolescents, young adults. So the hormones are alive
Right.
and well, especially. So anyway, those were three waves. I remember hearing him preach this, say in 1958, 59, using those examples of the three waves, which are considered, and he said, these are constant and aggressive waves sweeping across Europe. And he was talking a language in the 1950s, when I was president, repeating what he had said in the 1930s,
Wow.
and 1940s. So he was prescient in a way. I mean, more than you can even realize. So he said, you must be aware of this. And that's why he pointed out that the greatest challenge for the Catholic Church will be in marriage, family, and education. Schools. What are we dealing with today? The attack on marriage, attack on family, the attack on education, the attempt to brainwash children with the woke culture and so on. So these three waves work together. Now there's definite indication also that the Marxist conspiracy, which was concocted ultimately by Vladimir Ilyich Lenin in Russia, who took over the Russian Revolution in 1917 and gave it a beautiful format that attracted the intellectuals and young people. Everybody was on board with it, really. That they engineered a takeover of the West, the Western Europe, and the Western civilization, Western culture, and they promoted precisely everything aberrant sexually, everything that was sexually aberrant. They promoted it clearly. They're behind all this, and they still are, with money and everything else. So a lot of what we have now behind the pornography and all of that, and child trafficking, you name it, is a out and out conspiratorial attempt by the Marxist leaders of different places to promote a downfall, a collapse of everything Western, because the Western civilization is built on two foundations, right? It's built on the Greco-Roman culture, which is the best of it, the philosophical, the literary, the sense of natural virtue, and the other one, the Judeo-Christian ethic, the biblical, the Christian inheriting the great Jewish tradition. I mean, we are heirs, we ourselves, you and I, are heirs to the Greek Roman culture. We're heirs to the Jewish Christian culture, even though now we speak of a post-modern culture, post-Christian culture, and so on and so forth. Well, the fact is, whatever good has been created, the very concept of law that everyone is under is a Roman concept, and it's a biblical concept. You know, it's a concept that there's something above us that mandates how we should live our lives. And ultimately, it's God. But it's not arbitrary. It's the roadmap of happiness in this life and hereafter. Of course, part of the whole thing is a vision of a hereafter. And that's why the atheism eliminates that. See, if there's no God, there's no real meaning to life except here and now. That's why the Marxist-Leninist philosophy promotes a paradise on earth, a utopia, a paradise on earth. So it's a parallel religion. So other than eternal life, it's the paradise on earth with all of the lies. It's just one huge lie, of course. People tend to think of Marxism or socialism or the left movement as being financial, economic. It's an economic system. That was the terminology of many of the conservatives, politically conservative people, socially conservative people in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, up until the present moment, seeing the Marxist thing as being an alternate system of capitalism to capitalism. Well, it's way more than that. It's an atheism that is aggressive. It changes the entire definition of a human being, of a human person, therefore of human love, of human marriage, of human family, and so on. So it's really an enormous lie. And then who is behind it? Who is the great liar?
And what do they want? Or okay, that's
Well,
interesting.
See, Satan is the great liar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As notice that the two things come together. Jesus, in this amazing passage, the Gospel of St. John, refers to Satan as a liar from the beginning, the father of all lies, and a murderer from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Lie and murder, slaughter of human life. And whenever you see this violence against human beings, especially against the more innocent, the children, the women, what have you, the unjust wars, rape, crime, terrible criminal actions, all of this, even suicide, all of this is got the handiwork of Satan all over it. He is a murderer. He hates human life. Abortion is concocted in hell. It's a big lie. See, all of this women's reproductive rights is a lie. That the fetus is not really a human being is a lie. That the personhood of an individual is granted by the mother or by some other person. No, it's innate. That's a lie to say that the personhood is granted to a child by another human being. Not so. So there's a lie and a murdering connection. This is profoundly diabolical. It's so hard for most people to see the depth of all of this because they get caught up in critical race theory, the police violence, the unjust killing of a black man, what have you, all that we saw the summer before last, all the uproar over that. Fine, but one of the things that Marxism does, is to take advantage of a crisis to enlarge it, stretch it for all it's worth, and declare it systemic. That's a key word. Whenever you hear the word systemic, you're talking Marxist language. So racism is not just a sin. It is a sin. It's a bad thing, evil. But evil is committed by people, not by institutions. So to say the United States of America is systemically racist is a lie. See, that's not true. Or for people within the Catholic Church, bishops themselves saying, and even the Pope hinting at it, that the church is systemically racist is a lie. It's not true. Now, there are individuals who are racist. I mean, it's like saying the church is systemically contraceptive. The church is systemically addictive. The church is systemically pornographic because there are individuals in the church who embrace these drug abuse, alcohol abuse, pornography, it's like since men are the typical more than women beating up men beat up women, and spousal abuse. If we say, well, men are systemically anti-women, or that marriage is systemically about the abuse of women, that's a Marxist line. So see, they take advantage of, and those point to statistics, which of course weigh heavy on the young man and the young woman, particularly in the high school, college years. They're very sensitive to the extremes. So as soon as you give a statistic here or there, a factual misdeed, factual injustice, then you extrapolate and say the whole system is evil. It must come crashing down. They say, yeah, let's bring it down.
That's the objective.
And that's why it's always geared towards a revolution, tearing down the fabric of an existing culture, society, whatever it may be, because they find some injustice.
Do you perceive though? Okay, so at the root, it's diabolical. It's demonic at the root. Do you perceive that the rank and file leftist, the rank and file understands that this is the ultimate objective? I'm just trying to wonder how much malicious intent is out there.
Well, it's a very interesting question because I'm not sure it was Lenin or Stalin who used the expression of useful idiots. The useful idiots are the people who get riled up by the small number, the minority of real leaders who totally adhere to this doctrine. And they stir people up to be on board with it, because then they become the forward movement of it. They're the ones who stand out in the streets, put up the barricades, and throw Molotov cocktails and stones at police. See, the leaders don't do that. They hide. So they stir up a group of people. The larger, the better. And those are the useful idiots. So it's very clever. I mean, they are extremely clever. And this has been going on for decades and decades. The whole 20th century began in the 19th century. And Lenin had learned a lot from revolutionary movements that had preceded his own life in Russia and other places in the 1880s, 70s, 80s, 90s, before the turn of the century, the 1900s. So, that's how it is. I mean, they that's their method. It's all very clearly concocted. Now, if I say this, people listen to me and say, he's just a conspiratorial mind person. He's got a mindset of conspiracy. Well, the thing is, it is a conspiracy. It has been from day one. Absolutely. And they engineer these movements. I mean, you cannot explain the sudden explosion that happened 2 summers ago in all these different cities. All of a sudden, the violence that occurred. And then the media, of course, in collusion with all of it, calling it peaceful protests.
Fiery, but mostly peaceful.
Yeah. So what we're now is a penetration of ideas, which are very pernicious, very dangerous. I mean, that's a war right here on our soil.
Well,
I don't like to talk about this stuff because it's so negative, but it's real.
Yeah. I see a time going down. I don't know why that's there. If we lose each other at the end of this time, I'll just send you another link. I'm not sure what that time is going to happen.
We have time.
Yeah, great. So let's backtrack a little bit, maybe hopefully to something a little bit more positive. Can you tell me, it's the early 60s now, you're a young priest. What was your first job, your first role? Walk us through that.
Well, I happened to be ordained in Madrid. Although I finished my studies in Rome, I got my doctorates in sacred theology from Pontifical University, St. John Lateran University. I defended my doctoral thesis, which I wrote on St. Thomas More and his writings about heresy and heretics in England at the time, on July the 4th, 1962. And I was ordained exactly 1 month later, August the 5th, 1962, in Madrid with a group of 28 other men of Opus Dei, numerate men, that is celibate men like myself, from different countries, Americans, people from Chile, Ecuador, Italy, England, Ireland, and Spain. So, and then we all scattered to our various assignments. I was given an assignment for at least a school year to be a resident chaplain of a student residence for men around my Opus Dei in the northern part of Spain, the city of Bilbao, in the Basque country. So I dutifully went up there a few days after being ordained, and I was there. I thought I'd be there presumably until June or July of 1963, when I got a notification that I should get ready to return to the States post haste. So I was asked to spend a little bit of time in Madrid, a month or so before going back. They needed some help that I could give, helping out retreats and whatever. Anyway, I returned to the United States April 1963. And I didn't know where I was going to go. So I arrived, I got off the airplane. My destination was New York. I get off the airplane in Boston because I found out they were stopping in Boston, then do a little puddle jump to New York, the same plane. I got off in Boston so I could visit my family. I hadn't seen them for 6 years, anyone. So I spent that weekend with my mother, father, some of my younger siblings. And then I called down to Washington, D.C., where the headquarters of Opus Dei in the East Coast was located. And they said, your place to go to is New York. They gave me the number. I called down there and said, oh, we've been waiting for you. So they picked me up at LaGuardia Airport. a couple of days later, and I went to New York City, and I found that it was all to be done. Opus Dei hadn't really established itself at all in New York City. And we never worked without the green light of a bishop. People don't realize that we're not independent. We're not at all independent of the hierarchy. St. Josemaria was given this option by the Holy See to work with independence. Holy See gave this option. In fact, they balked at the idea that we would never start our activity, our apostolic activity in any diocese without a bishop having a clear document stating that we were to be allowed to work within his jurisdiction. And the Holy See did not like that. They thought that was extremely containing. He said, no, I insist on it. I don't want to do anything without a bishop knowing and being in agreement with. And if a bishop says, no, I don't want you here, then we're not there. So that's our style. He established that. Holy See finally approved it. And that's the way it was. So we could not get, at that time, the green light from the Archdiocese of New York. Not because it was anything regarding us. I think that he had, the Archbishop at that time, Cardinal Spellman, good man, wonderful man, had carte blanche. No more new things in New York. No more new things. There's too many people coming here to start new things. And so we were kind of into that category of new things. And so we waited and waited and waited. And finally, a year later, it all came together, 1964. And it was a little bit of a deal, kind of a nice deal. The was worked out by Monsignor Terence Cook, who later became the Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Terence Cook, a successor to Cardinal Spellman. He was a very, very good man. I think he was a very holy man. He understood Opus Dei very well. So he said, His Eminence Cardinal Spellman will never quite understand Opus Dei, the role of the layman, but he'll appreciate if you offer a priest to work in campus ministry, because he's concerned about that. He doesn't want to give priests of the diocese to that work. So if you come in and say, we offer you this, he'll say, great, you're in. So very clever. So he understood the mindset of Cardinal Spellman. So guess who was the pawn in this trade-off? Father Paul Donlan. So there I was, 20, just now having turned 26 years old, and I was entering my second year of ordination, and it all happened that way. So I was employed by the Archdiocese of New York to work in campus ministry at two campuses of the City University of New York, Hunter College in Manhattan, and Hunter College, at that time, Hunter College in the Bronx, later called Lehman College. So I spent the next 6 years helping the laymen of Opus Dei, as a team member, team player with them, get our apostles going, young people in the Bronx and so forth, and then working full time in this wonderful ministry, campus ministry. So that took me all the way up to 1970. 6 years of incredibly great work. So 1963, 64, I kind of twiddled my thumbs, not knowing quite what I was supposed to do. But I was hearing confessions in a wonderful church in Manhattan that's run by the Dominican fathers called St. Vincent Ferrer Church on Lexington Avenue on the Upper East Side. And I would do confessions there twice a week for hours. And a lot of people started coming for spiritual direction and confession. So I did what I could, but I didn't have this official status. I mean, they knew who I was. I had faculties from the Archdiocese, but it was an very odd situation for 1 year, from April of 63 to finally August of 1964, when everything came about. In fact, they even asked the pastor of the church in the Bronx to loan us the house that he had that was occupied by teaching brothers in my school, and now they're leaving the school, and they're abandoning this house, which is just 2 blocks from my church. What should I do with it? So then they called him back and said, we have the right guys. So he said, oh, fine. So then they told me, go and speak to the pastor and work out a deal. So his name, wonderful old-time priest, World War II Army chaplain, name was Monsignor McGrath. And I went up and we smoked a cigar together and became friends. And he said, yeah, you can use the house rent-free. Just pay the utilities. And if you can, help out in the parish for Mass as much as I could, as needed. I said, I'd be happy to do that. So I would do occasional Sunday Masses that they would call me, help out with confessions. But we had the house. So then we opened it up right in a very populous neighborhood of the Bronx, and full of white, blue-collar type people, firemen, policemen, plumbers, contractors. It was a very varied ethnic group of people and different backgrounds, European backgrounds mostly, and it was wonderful people, and Catholics and Protestants and Jews. It was a wonderful neighborhood. And we opened it up for the youth of the area. So we had a youth program there, formation, for middle school boys and for high school boys. And then that was kind of our foothold, so to speak, in our work with young people in the city of New York. And then from there, we opened up a student residence a few years later, in 1966, near Columbia University. And we were asked to do that by the Archdiocese. I got a phone call from one of the auxiliary bishops, he called on the phone. I picked up the phone, and he said, there's a student residence being run by a group of nuns for women. They're closing it down. It's a 5-story building. We would love if you guys could buy it. Our money. You could buy it and set up a student residence for Columbia University students. So because they asked us to do that, it was really very ambitious, way beyond anything we would have thought of doing. We did it. And God blessed it, and we got the money to buy it and fix it up, and we had 70 students living there. And I became the chaplain there along with another priest of Opus Dei who joined me in New York. So we had 2 priests and a bunch of lay people working professionally or doing graduate work, studies, what have you. So things just started moving along, and we worked hard and meeting people and helping people. And one of the great things that happened in my years in New York, first at the school where I was chaplain, and then with the residents, and this was the first time I had this experience, non-Catholics looking into the Catholic Church and having this wonderful experience of helping people become Catholic, who were either nothing, not non-baptized, or they were generic Christian, what have you. And it was just a beautiful thing. And I realized it opened up my eyes to a whole new field within the United States of America, not just in that particular locale. This is countrywide. This is a country that basically is religious, basically is Christian, some kind of Christian. And the Catholic Church presented well, the proper face of the Catholic Church can be extremely attractive. The beauty of the liturgy, the clarity of who Jesus Christ is, and the sharing the basic doctrine of Christ from the scriptures, and especially the Gospels. And that's where we were. I mean, that was our daily bread and butter, because we were in contact with people out there. I myself, even in the school I was, which was heavily Jewish and so forth, and Asian already, and the guys I was living with, Columbia University, law school, Columbia University, getting PhD in physics, someone else at Columbia University, mathematics. So, people studying and working at the same time. So they were in touch with people, and that's how you do it. Just simply meet people one-on-one. I realized this is it. This is what we've always been doing Opus Dei. But one thing in Spain, at the time of St. Josemaria, was Catholics dealing with Catholics. Whether they were lukewarm or fervent, another story. But here we're dealing with Catholics and non-Catholic Christians and non-Christians. So we have to expand our horizons a lot more. So that whetted my appetite. And ever since then, that has been one of the things I've most enjoyed doing, helping people find their way. It's what I call the Catholic fullness.
I think that is gorgeous. And I'm wondering, though, as you're working, helping people understand the Catholic fullness, How long were you in New York now? Working
I was there from 1963 to 1970.
Okay.
7 years. Yeah.
That's a very tumultuous time, at least in my understanding. Did you see a shift in the young people or in the flock that you were caring for at that time?
Yes, that was it. We were in the middle of that uproar, the anti-Vietnam War movement of young people, college students in particular, the sexual revolution, those two things, and the rebellion against authority, whether civil, ecclesiastical, familial, what have you. So it was an uproaring time. You know, it was a kind of a generic revolution. So I was in the middle of all of that. It was wearying, but we weathered that storm, helping people to not lose their balance, But it was a tough. And then the drugs. That was suddenly the opening up, first of soft drugs, marijuana, and then heroin. And to this day, we have all of these issues of drugs, drug overdoses, and God knows what. So that was the beginning of what is upon us now, and full blown, you know.
Right. Well, take me to the next step. It's now the 70s. What's your next stop?
So they asked me to leave New York, which was very hard. I became very attached to the city of New York and the people of the city of New York. I made very deep friendships there. I realized that New Yorkers have a capacity for real friendship, contrary to what people might think, deep friendship. So I was so connected with so many people over that 7-year period. Many of the students that I dealt with, I helped them with their marriages, their first marriages, then their baptisms, and that kind of thing. Just following through with kids who graduated into other aspects of their life. So I left all that, and they asked me to go to Chicago to work particularly in a inner city youth center that we had there called Midtown, which was very on the near west side of Chicago. And it had started, I think the people overstayed in Chicago started that center about 1965 or so. So it was growing, but it needed a little bit more attention. So I went in there with much vigor as I could to give it a boost. We're dealing there again with middle school, high school kids, and then some college students from different schools like Notre Dame University, University of Chicago, Northwestern University, who would come to help out as tutors, as camp counselor in the summertime. We had a big summer program that went on for 8 weeks, I think it was 8 weeks in the summertime, day camp. And the youth there was primarily Mexican-American, African-American, some Puerto Rican. And occasionally there were kids from Poland and Italy still coming in. It was an old Italian neighborhood near west side of Chicago. So we had a lot of kids there and a wonderful staff of people of different ages helping out. It was a lot of fun. And then also I got involved with another center dealing more with suburbanite families and their kids, the typical white middle class or upper middle class, so the interesting contrast. And then I got very involved, in terms of my ministry, with young women, high school and college women. I gave lots of retreats. I did camps for boys, camps for girls. So I was extremely busy with youth, very focused on young people for 1970 to 1976, 6 years, and very busy. Chicago was hard, though, because the weather was difficult for me. The winters were different from the East Coast winters. I grew up in Boston. I was used to cold winter and snow and that kind of thing, snow and ice and rain and all. But there's a certain severity to the all Midwest winters. They're much longer. They begin earlier and later, and there's a cold temperature that you get there that I've never experienced before. that is so tenacious, day in, day out, of temperatures hovering around zero at times, and a steel gray sky, no sunlight for a long time. And that was very hard for me. And I was very, at times begging, please get me out of here. I loved what I was doing, but I had a hard time. I got very sick there too. I developed a terrible, terrible case of pneumonia. And that morphed into, because of the high fevers, into a problem with thyroid and other things. I mean, one thing went into another thing. So I was sick there, but I was working at the same time. So I was hospitalized and came out. Well, nothing, in terms of mental illness, but physical illness that did affect, however, my emotions. So I was fighting that whole thing. So I was happy when one day someone came and said, the father, meaning the prelate of Opus Dei in Rome, wants to know would you be willing to go to San Francisco? So my answer was, do I leave now or tomorrow? I had been to San Francisco once to preach a retreat to the small center of Opus Dei there in 1969, and a small center in the city of San Francisco, in the western part of the city, called the Richmond District. So I got to, this was the middle of winter, and I was, this is kind of nice. So I happily went there in August of 1970 to move to San Francisco. And there, again, it was kind of getting things going. Again, it was just a small operation, barely functioning. And there's just a small number of people in Opus Dei at the time there. And the women of Opus Dei hadn't even started their apostolates there. So my role was to kind of help a little bit here and there and get things moving. It was a team. It was a team effort. And things started really moving very well. And conversions and vocations and so forth. And then I was there for 12 years in the city of San Francisco, 76 to 88.
Before you tell us the next thing, though, what was San Francisco like at that time?
Well, it was just beginning to be. Well, it was in transformation. It was moving from being a city of neighborhoods of immigrants, European immigrants primarily, and Latino immigrants as well. Centered very heavily Catholic population, actually, in the city of San Francisco, built around parish churches that were beautiful and well attended. So you had a real homey atmosphere in San Francisco in the neighborhoods, moving away from the downtown area, built around sort of ethnic identity of it. The North Beach Italian, Chinatown, of course, and you had the other ethnic Filipino sections, and the parishes which were primarily Irish, others, so forth. They had all of these different groupings, but it was beginning to move very quickly to another world, and it was beginning to become. Well, they get hit hard by the 1960s revolution. Everything happened in the 1960s, the sexual revolution, famous Haight-Ashbury neighborhood, which was the big hippie neighborhood of San Francisco of the mid-1960s, was still carrying on drug use and kind of free sex and all that kind of thing. So it was beginning to fall apart, just beginning to fall apart. But it took, like all things, when something is solid, it begins to fall apart. It takes a long time for everything to unravel. But you could see it was going to unravel politically, culturally, et cetera, et cetera. But I love San Francisco. It's a beautiful city. I don't know if I want to live there now, because it really has gone way down. I mean, it's disgraceful where it is now, and it's a political disaster too.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was a mixed bag, because you had the old traditions hanging on, and then these new movements, trends,
Isn't that also, didn't you witness the outbreak of the AIDS epidemic during that time, or no?
Yes. As a matter of fact, yes. I was right there when the first cases occurred, and it was caused quite a panic
Right.
That a certain population, obviously, at the bathhouses and all that sort of thing. Yeah, it was a shock. And at first they couldn't even identify what it was. They didn't have the complete picture diagnostically, scientifically, what it was as a virus infection,
Right.
which they apparently have now, much less any remedy for it. So
Right.
people began dying.
Right.
They get it and they die.
Right.
Yeah, so it was that was a shock too, to see that happen. You know,
But we carried through. We carried through
Yeah.
with the grace of God. And then, so 12 years in San Francisco, I think there was a radical change, correct?
Yes, it was very, very much so. One of the things I enjoyed right away in San Francisco was something I couldn't do growing up in Boston because I was so busy working. As I mentioned in that first interview, working. And also the availability of mountain climbing and all that was kind of more remote. You had to go further up northern New England to New Hampshire and Vermont and so forth. Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And then Chicago, I mean, Midwest is flat as a pancake. You don't have mountains. Again, you have to travel quite a distance. And the weather is problematic. I discovered this is a great way to deal with young people to go hiking and go backpacking. So I was very interested in organizing backpacking trips with the team of men of Opus Dei for college age guys, and then even eventually high school. So going up for 3 days or 4 days into the Sierra Nevada, one or another of the national parks or national forests, Yosemite, Kings Canyon, Sequoia, and all of the national forests all over the place, which are less regulated, like Tahoe National Forest became one of my favorite places to bring people backpacking. And then I expanded that to a men's backpack retreat annually done. So a kind of a traveling retreat in the Sierra, backpacking. And a man has suggested that to me. And I thought that was a great idea. I never thought of it. He suggested I do it. And I did it and I started doing it every single year. And then after that, I organized an annual father-son backpack trip for 3 days where it was. Kids between the age of 10 and 15. I found that under 10, it didn't work. And over 15, they were bored. Yeah. So there was a perfect 10 to 15. And it was just a wonderful thing. And my great supporters of all that were the moms. The mothers thought it was great, have their husbands away with their son or sons. And meanwhile, the mothers and the daughters, the mothers and other mothers would have a weekend together, do fun things. You know? A women's weekend. So it was a win-win-win situation. I got total support from the mothers for that one. So those were great. I was bringing along a little compact mask kit. I'd look for, as soon as we found a campsite with a fire ring, I'd look for a rock that was more or less flat, high enough that I could do mass on. So then I would do mass either that night or that afternoon when we arrived, or the next morning and next morning. So that was beautiful. The guys, all ages, the men and the boys, loved attending mass in this beautiful scenario of the Sierra Nevada. And for the most part, the weather's pretty good, although you do get summer storms in the mountains that are unpredictable. Even then, they tend to pass. So you may get a thunder lightning storm, maybe a downpour, but it passes for the most part. Most of the time we had sunshine. But it was just having a mass outdoors on a rock was something so attractive to the men and the boys. And to me, obviously, I have wonderful pictures of celebrating mass on these beautiful slabs of granite that, with this incredible mountain background. You're up at 9,000, 10,000 or more feet. It's just spectacular. And then they were demanding too, because these were not easy hikes. We hiked high and we hiked long and we carried everything in. Everyone had to carry in food, clothing, shelter. So it had a manliness to it, a tough, a kind of a militant toughness to it.
Mm-hmm.
That same time was so enjoyable to be together, sharing this kind of challenge. It was beautiful, really beautiful. And it was saying the rosary around the campfire. If we could light a campfire at nighttime, I'd be available for confession, chit-chatting with the boys or the men, and so on. So it was just a great, great experience. So I did this for years and years and years. And I brought that with me when I eventually moved to Southern California. Continued up until the last trip I made, I think it was four years ago. And I have been doing it for the last 4 years. So,
well, I think a lot happened though while you're doing these trips. You had a radical career shift, shall we say, when I believe in the 80s, you became a military chaplain. Can you walk me through that?
That happened in 1988. So at 12 years in San Francisco, I was reaching the age of 50. I was born in 1938. So March 1988 would be my 50th birthday. And I was making a retreat in January, the first week of January 1988, that year. And I was pondering in the presence, before the Blessed Sacrament, this thing had been on my mind for decades. I want to serve as a military chaplain. I think something I want to do for my country, something I want to do for the troops, something I want to do for the church, because there's such a scarcity of Catholic priests available. And I now have 26 years of priesthood under my belt. I could do, and I've been working with young people all my life up to that point, from the age of 24 to now 50, 26 years of priestly work with young people. Everyone was very focused on youth, that I think this would be a great thing, but I need permission of the prelate of Opus Dei in Rome, the head of Opus Dei in Rome, who at that time was Alvaro del Portillo, now Blessed Alvaro. So I requested that permission through to the vicar of California at the time, and eventually he and I spoke directly. So he gave me his blessing and said, "You can do this by all means," But he gave me wonderful advice, cautionary advice, and I said, "You stay in as long as you want. And when you come out, you can go wherever you want." So you sign up for 3 years, minimal. You can extend that, or you request extension. So for the priests, usually they grant extension immediately. Protestant chaplains, there's more competition to stay in, because there are so many of them, typically. But Catholic priests have far fewer. So I did 3 years and extended indefinitely. And after 6 months, I asked to get out. So I was in for 3 years, 6 months, almost to the day, from June of 1988 to December of 1991. 3 years, 6 months.
Can you share a little bit about your experiences, starting with training, which I hear is quite grueling, isn't it?
Well, the training for chaplains is not particularly grueling. There's a lot of classroom instruction, although we had the physical part of it. We went, at that time, I don't know whether they do it now, our basic training, our basic chaplain school was at Newport, Rhode Island, Naval Base at Newport, Rhode Island. And that's where they have the Officer Kennedy School, CS, where the Service Warfare School and so forth. They still take place at Newport. So it was a 2-month evolution from, you could take a choice 3 times of the year, summer, fall, or winter, spring. So I chose the summer, July, August. So I was commissioned in mid-June, and I went to school. I was commissioned a Navy lieutenant, which is like a captain in the Army and Marine Corps Air Force, 03, officer 3rd level. And I went to Newport from the beginning of July to the end of August. Already had my orders. I requested, and this is why I joined the Navy Chaplain Corps, I requested service with the Marine Corps, because the Navy Chaplain Corps serves the Navy proper, the Marine Corps, and the Coast Guard, what they call all 3 services. Whereas the Army chaplains serve the Army, Air Force chaplains serve the Air Force, but the Navy chaplains serve the other sea services, eminently the Marine Corps. So I requested that, and I was granted that.
Why?
So
Why the Marines?
I always had a fondness for the Marines. one of my father's brothers, whom I never met because he died before I was born, Uncle Bill, was a Marine in World War I. And he was gassed at one of the battles there. And then I had a cousin, one of my mother's cousins, was a Marine officer who fought at Iwo Jima in World War II. So I knew a lot about the Army, the Navy, the Marine Corps. I was fascinated by the Navy, always as a kid, but I had this strong kind of admiration for the Marines. And I felt the kinship with them. So I asked for that service in the Marine Corps. So at the end of August, I packed my bags and went off to my first duty station, which was Iwakuni, Japan. Marine Corps Air Station. So the air wing, a fixed wing aircraft, was located in near the Sea of Japan, in the island of Honshu, which is the middle island of the three main islands that compose Japan. Hokkaido to the north, Honshu middle, and then Kyushu south. And those are the three. So, and to give an idea, Hiroshima is close to this base. We were in the prefecture, it's like the state of Hiroshima. So I went there, and first thing they did was send me off to Korea. I spent 2 months in Korea, deployment in September and deployment later on in March 1989. So I spent 2 months in Korea. I spent 3 weeks in the Philippines. I spent 2 weeks in island Okinawa, and most of the time was in mainland Japan. I was a squadron chaplain to F-18s, A-6s, Harriers, A-4s, and then Harriers. And those were the three types of, the squadrons would rotate for the United States every 6 months from the East Coast or the West Coast. That time, El Toro, California, Beaufort, South Carolina, Yuma, Arizona, Cherry Point, North Carolina. They were constantly coming and going. So in the course of 13 months, from September of 1988 to the end of October 1989, I saw all the squadrons. And I say, so I was the squadron chaplain for everyone, because you're for everyone, but especially available to the Catholics for Catholic ministry, whatever it may be. So I lived on base for the most part, but I did bounce around, lived in a tent for 2 months in Korea in deployment. It was kind of nice, winter time as well.
Can you describe these young Marines that you were ministering to? What were they like?
Well, the air wing, of course, is unique. Within the Marine Corps, you got the different areas. So at that time, artillery, tanks, your recon Marines, you've got your generic infantry, you've got your different other, then you got your air wing. The people in the air wing are a little bit sort of, they're more land, well, figure, a typical squadron has, let's say, 12 airplanes, 12 pilots, 12 airplanes, but the squadron was made up of 250 people. It takes that many people to keep those planes in the air. The ordnance, avionics, all of the stuff that they radar, all these things that go with engines, everything else, that go with having fighter airplanes or attack airplanes. So you're dealing with people who are primarily very intelligent, very well trained, and highly technical. It's very similar to the Navy, because the Marine Corps pilots are they're trained as naval aviators. So they go through the same training as down in Pensacola as the naval aviators do. They can take off and land on an aircraft carrier as well as on land. Although most of the time they take off and land on land. But anyway, so you're dealing with a fairly select group of Marines, the young ones, the enlisted, boys and girls both, it was co-ed, who are very, very intelligent, very smart. Many of them have been just graduated high school and they enlisted. That's typical. 18-year-old, they go in for 18 to 22. Some of them will come out, go to college, go back in. Some come out, go to college, and that's the end of they might stay with the reserves and headway as enlisted or jump over to officer side, whatever. Some of them just stay in for life and work their way up to sergeant major or whatever, maybe master sergeant. So you have a variety of young people. That was the whole interesting culture of the air wing. And then after being there for, also of course, again, you're dealing with non-Catholics, right? So I baptized a young woman Marine in a tent chapel in South Korea. And she was from Oklahoma. She was a great granddaughter of Buffalo Bill Cody, famous Buffalo Bill. I baptized a young Marine corporal in Japan, and I baptized a wife of an officer in Japan, and I baptized somebody else. Somebody else. There's at least 4 or 5, I think. I can't remember right now. But there was this kind of thing going on all the time of ministry to non-Catholics. They just approach you and say, I think I'd like to become Catholic, sir. What do I do? So let's talk. So it's delightful. Then after I was sent back to the States, I requested continuing service with the Marine Corps on the East Coast. And they granted that to me. They sent me to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. It's a small town in North Carolina, right on the ocean, in the Atlantic. And I was assigned to I was a base chaplain assigned to the base, but they assigned me to a training command called the School of Infantry, SOI, School of Infantry. This is a follow-on training in infantry training to guys, male Marines, who have just graduated from boot camp. So they've done 13 weeks of incredibly intense training. In this case, Parris Island, South Carolina, east of the Mississippi. They have 10 days boot leave, and they come back and they go through SOI. So they get another month of intensive infantry training. The SOI has different levels, but this is the basic level. And so I was there for 13 months, dealing with turnover constantly. Every month, a new class coming through. So it was beautiful ministry. I would do a mass every Sunday in the base one of the chapels. We had 13 masses on base there, all over the place, miles apart. And I was in charge of one called Camp Geiger Chapel. So there was a Protestant service going on. They'd finish and they'd do Catholic Mass. I do the Catholic Mass every Sunday. Then I go out to the boondocks and do an outdoor Mass for Marines out there every Sunday, rain or shine. So I was dealing with these guys on hear confessions and chit-chat with them. Also a lot of counseling, sometimes out in the ranges or doing hikes or office hours, whatever it was. So I would be always available to them. I ran with them. I hiked with them. I shot weapons with them. So I did everything I could to be with the troops, which facilitates their opening up to the chaplain. So you're available to everybody, Protestant, Catholic, Jew, whatever it may be, just there. If they have any issue that they want to talk with the chaplain about, I would be the chaplain for that unit while they were there. So it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
It sounds beautiful. And Father, I want to be cognizant of your time. How much, do you have time left? What's your time look like?
I have 3 minutes.
3 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
So then let's do a very kind of broad question. So you're back in the United States now in the 90s, and it's now 2022. In these 30 years, how have you seen the faithful and the country shift?
Ooh. I'm still working with young people, boys and girls. And I've seen that young men that I deal with are basically the same as they've always been. Guys are guys. They're a little bit more naive. Young people are very ignorant of history, recent, past, whatever. So that's very unfortunate because you need to know history to have a perspective on the present. So there's a great ignorance of history, which is unfortunate. But I find guys quite open, they know less, but there's less feistiness than I counted in the 1960s.
Interesting.
For example, girls, I've noticed a major change in them. This has been going on since the 1960s. A major change in the way young women approach everything. And I think they're a bigger challenge. They're much harder to deal with in a way. They're really clueless on many basic things. So that's a whole chapter in itself. I mean, they're beautiful, they're wonderful, they're great people. I find some amazing young women, time to time, that are just a joy to meet. But they're, generically speaking, they're so caught up in the culture that is around the feminist movement that they don't realize how they're being dictated to, because they're so social, they're so group-oriented that they tend to imitate the styles, the modalities, the language, and everything that is unfortunately very harmful to them. And many women don't wake up to this to sometimes years later, decades later, they realize, I really screwed up when I was an adolescent, when I was a college student, and I rectified, or tried to. Okay. So there's a real challenge there for young women. But there's, everything is hopeful. Everything is hopeful. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I know that we're out of time, so I don't want to let this time expire without saying thank you. Thank you very much for talking and sharing your life experience. I have so many more questions that I'd like to ask, but maybe we'll save that for another time, shall we?
Absolutely, James. It's your call.
Okay. All right, Father. Thank you. Thank you very much.
God bless you.
God bless. I hope that you've enjoyed this interview that I had with Father Paul Donlan. I know that I've learned quite a bit, and I hope that you found it fruitful as well. If you would like me to continue on, I think we ran out of time this time, and I apologize for the abrupt end. If you'd like me to continue on and dive into the last 30 years of his story in hopes that we are able to impart more from his experiences and his wisdom, just leave something in the comments section. If you have a specific question you'd like to ask, again, leave me a note in the comments section, and we'll try and set something up. I just want to get a sense of there's a desire out there. All right. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. And on behalf of Peter and myself, we wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. God bless. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Pinedo Brothers Podcast, an artist podcast for Catholics. We hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please consider subscribing, and commenting below. That really helps. This episode was edited and recorded by me, JP. Makeup was done by no one, if you couldn't tell. The Pinedo Brothers are Catholic filmmaking brothers working to revitalize the world of Catholic art through film. For more information on us, check us out at pinedobrothers.com. Thanks again.